So my name is Phillip Brown. I graduated in 2011 and I majored in graphic design and minored in English. You know, it's so interesting because I feel like a lot of queer people talk about feeling like the sort of double life or feeling split. And that was certainly true at church before going to BYU and in some of those kinds of ways with neighborhood or the family. BYU is just like that, but all the time. I wanted to go to BYU and I sort of knew that that's where I wanted to be and that was kind of my only option. And I think there were so many positive things at BYU and a lot of things that were good experiences. But I think it's just the familiar experience of being closeted and having a secret, being at a place where I was worried about getting out. And I actually think the timing is interesting because in the middle of BYU was when I was also in the middle of sorting all of this out. And so you can sort of see my trajectory of like at the beginning of BYU fitting in really well and kind of loving it while having sort of that secret. And then kind of that flip-flopped near the end being less excited about being at BYU, less sure about things. But that was because I was starting to come out more, trying to have relationships, and that really, I think, puts a strain on the BYU experience. I don't know, I think some of it is just getting older and having more time to kind of grow into my queer identity, but I have to say that it was hard to do that while at BYU. I did date a little bit while at BYU, dated some guys, had a couple boyfriends, and that was right near at the end. And I think about those relationships and how, they didn't work out, but I think they didn't work out because I didn't really get to give it a try. And it was an experience of trying to live a part of my truth, but in secrecy, with no one watching, and with a bunch of guilt, and going to church afterwards, and all of that. And so I would say that leaving BYU offered an opportunity to really have a relationship. I mean, I was leaving BYU, but honestly, it was also when I went to get my master's and I went to Oregon. And so leaving Utah was another sort of removal of a bubble, getting a little further away from family and the church culture and expectations. And then I was able to really embrace my identity, try to be more authentic. And consequently, I feel like those efforts at dating, efforts at being myself, actually had a chance because there was air, there was space, and there was support. There were people who were supportive. And so, yeah, I think that I've grown into my identity in a way that was really difficult to do at BYU. Granted, some of that I think is just getting older and more years, but certainly helps to not feel so careful all the time. I struggle because I love some things about BYU and even some of the corny things about BYU culture and the real positive things. So I find myself wary to say, don't go to BYU. My husband went to the U and is a therapist and has all kinds of opinions, and we went to go visit BYU and he just, I saw nostalgia and I saw positive memories, and he just saw oppression. Now, I do think that if you're deciding to go to BYU, I know it's different in some ways than when I was there, and there's USGA and there's things that have changed. However, there is, I think, a cost because you can't really act on your feelings, or if you are trying to, you're gonna feel like you're leading a double life. And I think that weighs on people in maybe a way they don't anticipate and don't know how difficult that would be. So I guess for people considering BYU, I think to be real thoughtful about what that means. For people though who were like me, were at BYU, thought that's what they wanted, and then they felt kind of in the middle of it and you want to finish your degree and all of that kind of thing, I feel like what you really need to do is you need to find places to be yourself. Sometimes that's at home, sometimes that's with friends. Having somebody to talk to, or some buddies, multiple people to talk to really helps because then you release a little bit of that burden of silence. I mean, for me, it was really helpful to have other people to talk to. I also had a bunch of spaces at BYU that were kind of like my sacred spaces, a corner of the library, part of the art museum. And I walk those places now and I think about how those were sad places. That was places where I went to grieve, but those were also places that I could kind of like take a breath or escape a little bit. But then I also had friends and I could go away from BYU and we could laugh about Will and Grace or some gay thing and offer a little reprieve to the worry or the silence or the sort of monitoring your appearance. I guess in short what I'm saying is it's really hard to lead a double life and a secret life. And even if you feel like you're just leading a life where you're extra careful in one area, I think that's hard and you need a release from that every now and then. So I think it's important to find people who you can talk to. And, at the very least, maybe that's a therapist. I had a lot of good experiences actually at the counseling center at BYU, and that was helpful as well. So yeah, and then, maybe it's a little bit of hold on until the end. I did that and then was able to move on to other things. So it's not forever, but it can be a lot of time and it can be some hard years. So I don't know, you just gotta weigh it. I sought counseling pretty early, I think in my freshman year. I never felt like I was dealing with some specific diagnosable mental health issue. With a little more awareness and looking back on it now, I can see the effects of some depression and some anxiety. I think perhaps I'm susceptible to that, but I also just think you get some depression when you feel so alone and sort of separate from yourself, and you get some anxiety when you're worried that the way you walk or talk might betray you or that an environment that you're in is not safe. I saw a counselor through a lot of my time at BYU, and there were times that were difficult, and I think they felt uniquely difficult because I couldn't always share them. Sometimes I would go to talk to a bishop and they wouldn't handle it well. But I remember a lot of dissonance, a lot of splitting or division, these two selves, this real divided nature. I often was thinking about my experience being akin to sitting on the fence. I wanted to kind of go one way or go the other, but I was too nervous to go in one direction or the other. And so I just felt really split. And I think that just wore down on my mental well-being. I think I was trying to carry on as if that weren't happening, but then it was happening in the background. So that sense of a fractured self, in some ways, I don't think that's all BYU's fault, but I think the church does that a little bit. So from early on, having this suspicion that there's something about me that's not going to be appreciated, and as the deep dark secret, I feel like you get a little Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and so that church culture then is just all the culture at BYU. So I think I felt that a lot there, and I think that was hard, but I think that it was also something that gave me a perspective on others who might feel split in other ways or also feel othered. It's given me a lot of empathy, but definitely hard to feel like you're going through that alone. And again, going through it and then trying to maybe look like you're not going through it. And that's a tough thing to do. I think I just wanted to reflect on how, again, it was a positive and a negative experience at the same time, and that you can have both of those. And I think that for me, some of my saving grace was finding these sort of liberal pockets too, where I was a graphic design major, so being in the art department, it was different than some of the other parts of campus. There were some teachers who were a little more liberal and understanding. Same goes for the therapists. I'm sure there are some who are not great, but I guess I just feel like BYU is not one thing. There are individual students, there are teachers who have more compassion for a queer experience, have more understanding. There are other queer students, so there is a mix and there is a blend, and I found some of that. I'm sure there's even some more of that now. Got to find those places to be, people who you can feel safe around, opportunities to be yourself, and those do exist. So I don't think it's all just one church culture. Everybody's so Mormon, and everyone will like judge you. I think there's a real spectrum of possibility. So I think that's a positive thing.